my girlfriend at the time was telling me that, hey, we should go invest in this property, right? I'm like, yeah, sure. Like I just finished school. I was working this like rotational job with TD Bank. Pretty much she was like, yeah, like you're making money now. Like, yeah, you should like invest in a property. I'm like, okay, sure. Sounds good. So she's like, hey, like my uncle's a real estate agent. You want to go ahead and view this house in like this town and we can go like purchase it. I'm like, okay, yeah, sounds good. So I asked her, I'm like, wait, how much do you need for signing? She's like, I think $500 is good. I'm like, $500? She's like, when I got my condo, like that's how much I did for signing. Like, and I'm like, okay, $500 for a house signing. I'm like, that's solid. And then I was budgeting in my head. I'm like, okay, maybe in the next couple of months, like they require this X amount of money. Yeah, that works. I get there. And this is funny. I bring my dad with me, and then she brings her dad with me. So our pops meet for the first time. So I'm like, okay, cool, nice to meet you. I sit down, and the lady's like, all right, this is the house. I'm like, okay, looks good. How much is it? 840K. Okay, this is the plan. It'll get built in like 2.5 years or so. And her uncle was able to extend the deposit plan. Okay, sounds good. So how much do we owe you on the first day? Yeah, $20,000. I mean, $500 was there if they needed it.
I'm here with
Niruban.
So how old are you and what do you do for a living?
So I'm 28 years old, about to turn 29, and I work at Shopify as an operations manager.
So what were you taught about money growing up and who taught you?
I was taught, I guess, at a young age about money from both my mom and dad. And it came to the sense of like respecting money and like not wasting money on dumb things as like any other parent would teach you. That's pretty much like the basis of how I was taught.
What about like in terms of like saving money and like about debt and credit cards and investing? What did you learn about that?
Yeah, for sure. So I come from a family where my dad was at one point a businessman. He owned his a convenience store in Scarborough, Ontario back in, I guess, the late 90s. It didn't do well. He actually lost a lot of money from that business, actually over $100,000. And it came at the point where they were busy at one point in the 90s and things started going downhill after malls started opening up on Sundays. So all the Sunday shoppers would be diverted away from convenience stores and they started going to the mall and such. In Scarborough, it was Cedar Bay Mall, was where everybody started going to. Yeah. So pretty much they lost a lot of money from there. They did not own a property at that time. Living in Scarborough, they were immigrants. They came to Canada in the late 80s. Pretty much they were living in an apartment building, renting out, paying rent, and also managing this business too. My dad also worked in the evenings at like a factory as well. Same with my mom. So pretty much together, both of them. My dad took an extra job, 2 jobs, and my mom also worked another job. And they would alternate. I was about 3 at the time, and my mom was pregnant with my sister. So they basically worked a bunch of jobs to pay off. Yeah, I remember this because every time my mom, like, I would want to go out and play, and I would always see my dad coming in to sleep, and then my mom swapping and she's leaving, and I'm with my grandpa. So we see a lot of the back and forth. But yeah, they eventually took a year and a half for them to pay off all the debt. And it wasn't only bank debt; like they borrowed money from like outside, like I guess you call them loan sharks, people in the community that they knew, and obviously they wanted to make sure they pay it back as well too. So yeah, that's what I saw. Like I didn't know what debt was, but I knew they were just working hard. But as the years got older and I got older, they started telling me, this is what we went through and such like that. We don't want you to be in a position like that, which is why they wanted to make sure, like my sister and I, we went to school and get that education. So basically, they taught us that don't ever, A, fuck up your credit. Yeah. B, don't ever look to file bankruptcy. And C, just make sure you save money and you have like an emergency cash flow with you at all times in case shit hits the ceiling.
Did you learn anything about like building wealth in terms of, did they tell you to save your money and buy a house or any other investment avenues?
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. So my parents, like when we were living in Scarborough, they were living in the 90s up until 2005. I think it was in 2003 is when they actually bought their first investment property, which is an apartment building. A condo right by Scarborough Town Center. It was their first ever property. Back then, that condo, they bought it for like $140,000 and it was super dirt cheap. It was a 2-bedroom plus 1 bathroom, like mid-rise condo that they bought. Pretty much, it was just like they pulled all their savings that they could to save that house. But like my dad never knew anything about like stocks or stuff. It was pretty much like advice that his friends would give them. And that's pretty much everything's like word of mouth. They didn't have any like accessible tools. Sometimes like when they walk in, he had a friend that was like a mortgage advisor. He'd give him tips. He'd say, hey, just put your money in your RRSP. You can always take that out at the time that you need it. Yes, you'll pay some tax on it, but there's still some money that gets pooled and it's tax free and such. But that's about it. The rest of it just came from me like teaching myself, but mainly like my pops, like he made sure like the foundation was there. It's like if you have a credit card, don't pay the minimum payment. Make sure you pay on top of it. Try to pay it off as soon as you can. Don't let any interest compound and such like that. So that was pretty much the foundations they taught.
Do you think that you need to own the home that you live in order to build wealth?
That's a good question. So my wife and I, when we were actually dating, is when we actually decided to buy our first property together. We're actually 1 year into dating, and the prices of houses were actually going up. And we were basically talking, it's like, hey, like regardless of where this like relationship goes, I think we should like invest in a property. And we decided to purchase a property. We currently do rent it out, but what we look at is we want to make sure we own it, whereas we still receive some sort of rental or passive income, because right now like we should be moving in there, but we chose not to because first our mortgage is on a variable mortgage, and definitely it is a high mortgage, and we don't want to see our whole entire paychecks just go towards paying off a house and not being able to enjoy or like experience the early years of our marriage, which is why we pushed away. But going back to your question and saying, do you feel that like owning a property is how you should own? Well, definitely, because there's the equity that you can definitely leverage off of it. You can use that for any of your other expenses, whether it be for that house or even for your life, or if you want to invest into another possible business or financial opportunity, definitely it would be beneficial to own like a property for yourself.
What do you think is the biggest reason why a lot of people struggle to save money?
That is a good question. And honestly, it's discipline is one thing. And I'll be honest with myself. People probably see me on Instagram and be like, oh, this guy's always having like, he's rocking hats, he's rocking shoes. What happens? There's a part of you that wants you to enjoy the money that you spend. There's some people that get peer pressure based on the circle, like the friend circle group that they're with, that they want to go ahead and spend money, or else they look like the cheapskate, or they're like, oh, this guy doesn't spend money on this. And like just to feel like it's kind of like it goes back to like the playground. If you're not the coolest kid, if you don't have the new sneakers and stuff, people are like, I don't want to play with you. You have like the raggedy ass clothes and stuff like that. There's fear. I feel there's an emotional aspect to it. People do feel or insecure that they need to spend this much, but then they don't understand that the people who are actually, spending this much on clothes and shoes, they're like definitely like financially they're down at the moment. And you want to make sure that you don't let your emotions get the best of you when it comes to those things.
So how old were you when you learned what a credit score is?
I think I was probably 12 or 13 when I learned what a credit score is, because when my dad lost his business, he did take business loans and it did impact his credit a lot. So in the beginning, we were struggling to find like a house in the beginning, but he did not file for bankruptcy is one thing that he told me he would never do. In the end, he started just, paying off all his debt and making sure he was making payments on time, bringing back his credit score. And he was emphasizing how important it is. And his go-to thing was, if your credit score is fried or if your credit score is shit, he's like, your life is done. And he says it's in the most like Tamil way. We're Tamil. They say in the most Tamil way possible. It's like, yo, walke is done, bro, if your credit score is fucked up. And I'm like, okay, sounds good.
So that like that was ingrained in you. You have to have a high credit score. Why do you think having a good credit score is important?
It definitely looks at the way that lenders are going to be evaluating you. How often has this person, Niruban or Vint, for example, like paid back their loans? Are they maintaining consistency? And definitely like how you're able to like handle like when your cost of living goes up, and then obviously you have your different ratios like debt equity ratios and stuff. How are you able to handle and balance payments and such like that? Definitely it's going to give you opportunities, especially if you're looking for line of credits or like even personal, or like when you have property, like secure line of credits and such like that. You definitely want to have a good credit score because the banks have instilled more confidence that you will be able to pay back that loan and not default. Definitely, because at the end of the day, it's the bank's money that they're lending out to you, and they want to make sure that they're giving it to the right person.
Where did you learn the most about personal finance aside from everything that you learned from your parents? Like, where did you learn the most on your own about personal finance?
To learn about personal finance, I would say it's honestly an ongoing journey. You can't just learn about everything personal finance in one night. I feel it's like trials and tribulations. You have to go through it. You have to fall down on your face, learn from it. It includes like, getting your feet wet in the stock market, whether it be buying your first share of like TD Bank or Apple, learning about dividends and such. For me is I used to work at Kumon like in high school. So I worked at a few different locations, but one location I had, the head instructor, his name was Eric. And till this day, like super like down to earth guy. And like I felt like he was like the Mr. Miyagi from like Karate Kid. Like not that he's Asian, but it's just like the way that he just instills like the confidence in you and teaches you about like financial like literacy and such. Like the first book that he ever made me read was Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. And I'm like, what is this? And right before I read it, I was probably my first year at university. Yeah, 17, 18. And he basically told me, he's like, don't drink the Kool-Aid. He's like, when reading the book, he's like, don't take everything literally word for word. Just take it with a grain of salt. And I made sure like I read the book and I understood like when Kiyosaki is like alluding to the different, like what would rich dad do? What would poor dad do? It just shows you the mindset of how like the people who are the rich would think compared to somebody who's either like in a middle class situation, like based on like, they're not willing to take the risk and go out there and adventure into this. where they be more like conscientious about their money and such. So learning about that and reading those books, understanding the time value of money, what's the worth of money today versus tomorrow. I also made sure that when you're in university, and especially for like young investors out there, like take courses, like if you're minoring or if you're in business, like take courses that you think that are going to provide you of use. Because we, at the end of the day, like people say C's get you degrees, and you just want to like go ahead, do your degree and just get out there. Like go out there and take a course. Like I took personal finance and I learned about like wills and like retirement, like savings and like estates and stuff like that. Things they don't teach you, but you have to go and find it. It's there. You need to go out there and find it for yourself. Like taking those courses is definitely something that's beneficial. And honestly, like sometimes it's like talking to people that I meet in my network who, you know, are doing well, have been in the industry, whether it be in like a professional setting. How do you invest your money? Asking them questions. I feel like everyone has this some sort of embarrassment because they might not have like a lot of money and they feel like they're setting like barriers and like levels in front of themselves. Like, oh, should I be talking to this guy because he's rich and like, oh, look at me. Like, don't compare yourself. Like, you want to get somewhere and you definitely have to go out and go talk to these people. So definitely like step out there and talk. That's how I met different like mentors and stuff like that. Don't be shy about your financial situation. Today you'll be something like this right now, but you're trying to get there to a better place for tomorrow.
What would you say is the best piece of information that you learned about personal finance that's impacted your life the most?
Always put your emotions in check. Absolutely. And I would say that is, especially when we had the pandemic, online shopping definitely was a huge thing because you couldn't leave the house and like go and do shopping. So for me, it's like I'm home, locked down. What do I do? So, you know, casually go online, shop, buy stuff, package arrives at your door. And it's that quick adrenaline rush that you get from opening the package. And then you're like, oh, brand new shoe, a brand new hat. And things pile on, but you don't realize how much you're spending. This is when your emotions start to get the best of you. You're going for that adrenaline rush, but you don't understand that how much is your wallet hurting. And it's like, don't go broke to act rich. But for me, it was just like finding that passion of like, oh, sneakers and shoes. And that's like the content I want to create. But you got to understand that a lot of these content creators are not getting stuff like sent to them like for free. They are using their own money and they're spending it. And it can go with anything, whether you are buying a car, whether you are buying like something, nothing has to be new. I started looking at things like that were secondhand, like secondhand sneakers and stuff like that, because I'm saving a lot of money. It's that opportunity cost that you're looking at versus like spending $300 on something, whereas someone wore it once or used it once and it's now $200. You're saving yourself $100 that you can take, put it back into your whatever investment vehicle and use it to buy, you know, shares or stocks or whatever it is. I think the main thing is like always keep your emotions in check. It's like, do I need it? Yes or no? And if you truly need it, then okay, you will buy it. And you have to understand and ask yourself, give yourself some value. Like my wife is always drilling that question into me. Sometimes I find it annoying, but at the end of the day, it's nice to have somebody with you that's able to balance you out. One might be the spender. My wife is definitely more conservative and she's smart with the decisions, but I like that because when you're with somebody who thinks opposite, it is definitely good. And it creates a great balance too. My best financial advice, and it's been given to me by a couple of my friends and even like my mentors too, always put your emotions in check. Ask yourself not only once, but a few times, is this going to be a worth decision? Whether it be leasing or financing a new car, or if you're just buying a car, what kind of brand car are you buying? Is it going to hold some sort of residual value? Just like when you ask yourself, buying a property that's way outside of the GTA for like something for $1 million, that's the same as another property in Toronto for $1 million. What's going to hold the value? So it's asking yourself those questions and putting your emotions. Yes, you want this, but how badly do you want this?
Do you have a budget? And if you do, when did you start budgeting?
Ooh, that's a good one. I would say I started budgeting mainly when, I guess in university, working like as a sales rep at a gym and also, you know, working at Kumon too. I had like 2 jobs and I was balancing it. For myself, I helped out a lot at home. I started work when I was in grade 8. So I worked at Kumon since then. And in the beginning, like my paychecks pretty much, back then minimum wage, 2009 was about, so yeah, about $8. Yeah, $8. Pretty much you get and I would get paid monthly. It's not even like bi-weekly. Monthly, probably like $400, $500, someone's pocket change. I'd give like a portion of that to my parents at home because I know like the groceries, it's not easy. My mom would work, my dad would work. Later on, my mom would get sick and then it would be my dad, you know, doing 2 jobs and such. So I would see that. I'm like, you know what? Let me help out, you know, cover whatever I can. And I felt good inside. I did not, this is me with like zero financial knowledge of the stock market. If I knew this before, definitely I would have went ahead, invested into Bitcoin when it was like whatever. But it's like, you know, coming from like an immigrant household, like it's like survival of the fittest, but at the same time, you want to make sure that you're helping back the hand that fed you. So in this case, it was my parents. So that's where literally all my paychecks were going for the first few years. After university and, you know, taking a student loan out, using that to like, you know, pay for my studies and also working too, I saw myself like spending a lot of like money. And I'm like, you know what? I need to see where my money goes in and out. And the same, my same mentor from Kumon, Eric, he told me, he's like, hey, you should budget. Like look at how much money is coming in every account and going out. So I started running it. What's coming in, what's coming out. What are my liabilities? Am I making any payments for my one credit card that I had at the time that my dad made me open when I was 18 to build that credit score up, and just started going from there. And like the greatness of budgeting is like you actually get to see where things are going. Some people may like to have it on an Excel spreadsheet. For me, I like to write it down. Just like that's how I used to study. Like write down something, then I remember something. When something's due, when something's coming up. I use a calendar. I'm an old school guy. Yeah, I work at a tech company, but till this day, I write stuff down because I still remember it. And I'll copy it over to my phone as a reminder. But budgeting is key because you're seeing all the cash flows that are coming in, what's going out. You can make that decision, as I was saying before, based on your emotions. Do you need to be making this purchase or expense every month? For example, a subscription. Do you need this where I can just like go ahead and like go watch a movie, or like, you know, small incidental like occurrences that take place? So budgeting definitely has been key.
Tell us what you think the biggest money mistake you ever made was.
Buying shoes. Nah, to be honestly, it's an appreciating asset. But that is actually a good question that you bring up. Buying shoes, yes, it is an appreciating asset, but it depends on which shoe that you're buying. But it's also, if you bought that shoe off a credit card and you're holding that shoe for like X months and you didn't pay that credit card off yet, you're holding on. You're holding on. You're holding on to that interest. You know, you're those interest payments or whatever, $20 or $30. You're holding on. So say you hold on to that shoe for $8. You better make that interest payment back and whatever profit on top. This I didn't realize. And I'll be honest, that was like a mistake that I made in the beginning of like buying these like hype shoes and stuff like that. And I wasn't a reseller because I really liked the culture, but I realized that I had to get these pairs off my hands because I couldn't afford to hold them any longer. That was a mistake that I made. So same thing, going back to your emotions. How bad do I want this? Will I wear this? Will I sell this? Will this hold any value? Sometimes it all depends on what the culture is talking about, the sneaker culture. If people think that, oh, this is a very hyped up sneaker that I want and such like that. But it goes back to the concept of what's my biggest mistake. Definitely, I wish that the money that I made on earlier in my life, I held on, but my parents did need the help, and I didn't want to. For me, I wasn't selfish. I knew how much they sacrificed. They put a roof over my head, clothes on my back, you know, food on the table, and definitely was something that I give back. But it was also a bet that I put on myself that I'm confident that I can get myself to a point where I can make the money that whatever I made early on growing up to get there. So definitely my one regret is for sure I wish I saved the money that I made in the beginning, but it's not a regret because I was able to, you know, finish school, get a good job, and like work myself now.
I can completely relate to that, except with basketball cards. The exact same thing you said, but with basketball cards, man.
One biggest financial regret that I'll say, oh yeah, definitely not. I wish I invested in Bitcoin and Apple stock and Tesla back then. You know, everyone has these regrets, but there's no point in regretting. You got to move on at the end of the day.
What would you say is your biggest money win?
Definitely sneakers. I mean, I got shoes in my collection where definitely I can like, you know, sell and like get it back. But to be honest with you, my biggest money win, I actually tell you the story. When my girlfriend at the time was telling me that, hey, like we should go invest in this property, right? I'm like, yeah, sure. I was just working my first ever like I just finished school. I was working this like rotational job with TD Bank. Pretty much, she was like, "Yeah, you're making money now. Like, hey, you should like invest in a property." I'm like, "Okay, sure, sounds good." So she's like, "Hey, like my uncle's a real estate agent. You want to go ahead and like view this house in like this town, and we can go like purchase it." I'm like, "Okay, yeah, sounds good." So I asked her, I'm like, "Wait, how much do you need for signing?" She's like, "I think $500 is good." I'm like, $500? She's like, when I got my condo, like that's how much I did for signing. Like, and I'm like, okay, $500 for a house signing. I'm like, that's solid. And then I was budgeting in my head. I'm like, okay, maybe in the next couple of months, like they require this X amount of money. Yeah, that works. I get there. And this is funny. I bring my dad with me, and then she brings her dad with me. So this is when our pops meet for the first time. So I'm like, okay, cool, nice to meet you. Sit down, and the lady's like, all right, this is the house. I'm like, okay, looks good. How much is it? $840K. Okay, this is the plan. It'll get built in like 2.5 years or so. And her uncle was able to extend the deposit plan. Okay, sounds good. So how much do we owe you on the first day? Yeah, $20,000. I mean, $500 was there if they needed it, but thank God that it would have been embarrassing if I had like a draft for $500 ready. I'm keeping my cool. My dad's looking at me, and for me, like I'm selfish in the sense of I don't want to ask my parents for money because they've already done so much for me. Like I need to find out the hard way of saving for property. So that I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna do it myself. But this was an unexpected cost, unexpected opportunity, and pretty much I looked at her. She looked at me and she's just like, oh shit, I told this guy $500 and now it's like $10,000 per person for $20K. I'm like, yeah, for sure. Can you give me 5 minutes while I go arrange? I'll go get you the deposit and come back. My dad looks at me. He's like, okay, you got this? I'm like, yeah, I got this. I step out, make a phone call to my uncle. And till this day, that guy has a special place in my heart. He always told me, if you need a start or if you need any help, let me know and I will lend you money personally. I told him, I'm like, hey, I came to sign a house with my girlfriend. He's like, yo, congrats. And I told her, she told me $500, but it's actually $10,000. And he started laughing. And he's like, I got you. The man went in his pajamas and wife beater to RBC and wire transferred me $10,000 and I got the draft and I signed it. I literally walk out holding, the documents. I'm like, I just pulled the trigger on a house unexpectedly. And I tell this to other people too. Pull the trigger when you have to. Like, it will be like, the more you think about it, the more you wait, the opportunity will be gone. When life comes and there's an opportunity knocking at the door, go answer it, because you never will know when it'll come back for that opportunity, especially at that time in like 2019. I ended up, luckily at the job I worked at had overtime. So I was working extra hours, making sure that every 6 months we would have to give like the deposit to make sure we got it. And it took like, 2 years to fully put the deposit down. I paid back my uncle in time. And I wanted to make sure, money never got in the way for family. We got the house. We ended up, finding a tenant, gave it for rent. And yeah, that's where we are. And to be honest, like, I would never see myself like owning like a piece of property, but I tell folks it's like, it can happen. You can make it happen. It doesn't have to be with the same job. Like, you can have another side hustle too. There's an opportunity out there. Like, go seize it. It's just an excuse saying that, oh, I'm unable to buy a house in this economy and stuff. It's possible. It's just, how much work are you willing to put down and get to work to make that happen?
We all have the same 24 hours, right?
Yeah, man.
So, what is the best investment vehicle in your personal opinion, and why?
Very good question. Definitely real estate, I would put it as number one. You can never go wrong with real estate, either whether it be a pre-construction or whether it be like a BRRRR investment, buy, renovate, repeat, return, whoever invented that acronym. If you can rent it out, if you can put it on Airbnb, or if you can, buy a property for cheap, fix it yourself, knowing that how much money you would need and to resell it and make the property, I definitely would say real estate will always be your first one. If you're a risk taker, I would definitely say look at the stock market. There are definitely stocks, but you got to do your research. Sometimes it starts off with thinking about like, hey, what's something that I use every day that like is so beneficial for my life? For example, your iPhone, Apple, put your money into those stocks. A consumer product. There's also my man right here put me on these ones for ETFs, VFV and VDY. Those are like some good ETFs to put your money into. It also depends on like, how soon do you expect a return? Are you in it for the long range? Or are you in it for the short range? If you're definitely in it for the short range, stocks is a way to move your money around if you want to be a day trader and such like that. Crypto is another avenue, but you have to do your research. If you're going to commit something, don't just half-pass commit yourself into like an investment. Like, go in there and research and see what it is. One recommendation I would give for anybody who's interested in reading charts is Sticky Stock Charts. Good book. It basically teaches you the basics of like reading a stock chart. What these little like patterns and like when the stock is going up versus down, and like how can you infer details about where the stock direction is headed. It's putting the time in is the main thing. So I look at real estate as my number one, but at the same thing, you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. So you want to spread it out. Stocks, ETFs, long-term investments, and even like things you're passionate about. I'm passionate about sneakers. I'm passionate about hats. I know some things drive value. If there is a craze or a hype over an item and that you can estimate the longevity of that hype, whether it be for sneakers, the sneaker culture will never die. There are always going to be sneakers that people are going to be into. I hold on to my sneakers and make sure I take good care of them. People are like, hey, why do you always clean it? I know I can liquidate this. I know I can turn this into cash at the end of the day. There's no point in beating it out. And it was funny because a good friend of mine is a sneaker reseller. And when he looks at sneakers, he looks at the bottom of the shoe to see how much wear and tear is on the bottom. And that's what he also uses to estimate. So I'm like, hey, he's like, so I ask him, like, what are you looking at to like make sure like the sneakers hold their value? He's like, scrub your bottoms. I'm like, I do that. He's like, yeah, man, that's why your sneakers hold value. Scrub the bottom of your sneakers. Like, some people look at that and it's like, it's the bottom of the feet. Like, your feet go on top of it. You want to make sure that it's kept in a good condition. Just like basketball cards. Do your research. You can't just go to Dollarama and buy like basketball cards that might end up being like fake basketball cards and expect to get them graded. No, there are certain stores that sell those basketball cards. So do your research at all time on something that you're passionate about to see if there is a value that lies within.
Damn, bro, you're giving out a free game about sneakers to the audience, you know? Appreciate you. So how much of your income do you invest or save on a monthly basis?
Based on my income, definitely what I try to do is I try to save at least about 20% of my paycheck into savings. Sometimes it might be tight there, especially at an age where all your friends are starting to get married. You definitely, there's a lot of wedding gifts that you got to give. I got one tomorrow, but hey, this is like people that are close with you. So it's different, like it comes in and goes out, but there's different expenses that come up. You always have to have like a rainy day fund. I try to have like, money tucked away. I used to do something where it was like one of the what rappers used to do, have a Nike box and have like bands rolled up with like, $20 bills and stuff and just chuck it there. Like a crazy story on that is growing up when my dad bought his first house, we literally had he works in like the mechanical field, the automotive industry. He made like a steel chest and it has a little slit in it, and he put dollar bills and coins down it. It was like a black box. No one knew how much was there, but you just save it in there. And I kind of practice like a same method where I can try to save up as much money as I can. Things were expensive, especially after getting married. Like weddings are expensive, especially when you come from a brown family and you have a lot of family. They are expensive and you have to spend a lot of money. Currently, I'm down right now, to be honest with you, but it's like paying off your stuff and ensuring that there is some sort of, how would I call it, discipline that you put in fact. You're able to save that much money. And if you're able to automate it, your savings. Prior to me saving up for the wedding was, whatever paycheck I got, okay, X amount percentage has to go here. I know I have to pay these vendors and such like that. It's the same principle that after I pay off my debts and stuff like that, and it's not wedding debts, it's, owning a house, owning a property, other expenses come vacation, travel. It's making sure that you have a fixed allocated amount that's going into your savings, that's automated, and you choose either in a locked investment where you can get the money back out. Because RSP, for example, so how I look at it is, since my company offers an RSP incentive, I ensure that I'm putting money into my RSP because I do not want to pay too many taxes at all. And I want to get a tax refund back. So from my pre-tax earnings, about $200 is going into like, bi-weekly paycheck for my RSP. Sometimes if I feel comfortable, I can change that percentage anytime that I want, but I'm still making sure that savings is still happening. Even if I'm down right now, there is a savings going because it will help balance out my taxable contributions. And then when tax season comes, I have a chunk amount that comes out. I can use that to pay off something. Done. And that's the value of saving. It's like, even if it's not you saving like $1,000 every paycheck based on how much you make, or if you're making like $1,500, have a fixed amount and know what investment vehicle to park in it. Because one bar that I love like referring to is like, you got to make money while you're sleeping. And that is your money that's sitting inside a checkings account shouldn't be in a checking account. It should be in like a savings account that's accumulating interest on it as you're going to sleep every night. So that's how I like to automate things.
Shout out to EQ Bank.
And Wealthsimple.
Yeah, 4%. You have all of the tax sheltered savings accounts that we have here in Canada. And when did you open each one?
Yeah, great question. I opened when I was 18. I opened a TFSA and I also opened an RRSP. The RRSP actually I started utilizing a little later, especially when it came to investing towards the house that both my wife and I purchased. And I'll tell you the great benefits of having them both. Actually, the first mistake I made with the TFSA was I just went up to TD and asked them for a TFSA. Make sure it's a self-directed TFSA. Exactly. Even for your RRSP, make sure it's self-directed. You yourself will invest, not them. That's the whole point of investing. Know what your money is doing for yourself, not what the broker says. I'm not knocking down the hustle of any mortgage brokers or financial advisors that are like watching this video. Oh yeah, you don't want to be paying those fees too. I mean, when I worked at TD, I got away because I had all the commission fees were waived and such like that. So that was good. But after I quit, I'm not paying $10 for a transaction. Hey, Wealthsimple. I love you guys for that. But yeah, so the TFSA I started utilizing by putting all my money in there and saving. And then what I did was I migrated that portion over into my RSP, and then especially during the pandemic time, there's a bunch of stocks that I started when they tanked, I started putting my money into, and they actually helped me. I made a couple of $1,000 just out of there, and it actually helped me faster on my target of like saving blue chip stuffs. Yeah. Especially on dividends. And some of them were like, yep, US and Canadian, a mix of both. I invested in a couple of like SPAC, like special purpose acquisitions. Neo, if you know that company. Definitely put my money in there, made a couple thousand from it. And same thing, emotion. I made sure I never got the emotion the best of me because I knew what my goal was. And it was, trying to get to pay that deposit or the final down payment for the house quicker through these stocks and such like that. So it definitely helped. And in my RSP, I had, I was up a good amount. I was up. And once I used it for my first time home buyer incentive, which you still have to end up paying back your RSP of whatever you took out, it came beneficial, especially to use for my house and get that credit back as well too. So yeah, the RSP definitely came in handy.
Do you have an emergency fund? I think you mentioned this earlier. And is it 3 months of your expenses, 6 months of your expenses? And when did you implement it?
So an emergency fund has always, I guess, that's a good question. So emergency fund has always been there in the sense of, for example, the pandemic, when it hit, and I worked in TD at that time, especially I worked with TD's e-transfer department. All the blanks were closed and there was you can go in and withdraw money, but especially moving money was tough because like limits were all like set at one point. And at that point, cash was definitely king. So I made sure like I had physical cash on me, and people tell me it's like, oh, everything's on your debit. No, you need to be prepared for any circumstance. And for me, it was having an emergency fund, whether it be $1,000, $3,000, $6,000, like you said, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. It all depends on what you spend. That is your emergency response. It's good to have like a comfort zone in there, like a buffer in the sense of like, okay, $1,000 of emergency, but just in case, let's make the room for $2,000, for instance. That way, I know I'm not just strapped on this. I would think I have $1,000, but there is $2,000 that I actually saved, but I didn't remember that I had 2,000 saved up. It's just $1,000 that's there. That's what I'm going to operate of. And then if, something happens, shit hits the fan, oh, I actually have $2,000 that I can use to purchase this because I need to fix something. I remember when my dad was selling his house, the house that we lived in, 2 weeks before we put the house on the market, pipe started to leak and the ceiling started to get wet. And my dad's like, oh shoot, we can't have this happen before we sell the house. Luckily, he had an emergency fund on him for about $2,000, and he used that to quickly call a plumber, get that fixed, patched up right away. Or else it would have lowered the price of the house, because that's a material defect that you see right there that it's clearly visible. So it's small rainy day incidentals that happen. You need to make sure you have money just in case. So I always told myself, have the amount that will come up. If it's a tornado, make sure you have insurance, and that will cover that. But make sure you have enough based on what you spend on a day-to-day basis, and make sure there's a little bit more out in there too.
Yeah, just like your story, the best way to avoid debt is to have an emergency fund, especially in a high yield savings account. Do you have a financial goal, and how do you plan on achieving it?
Very good question. Do I have a financial goal? Everyone wants to be debt free, but in my eyes, there's no such thing as being debt free. You own a house, you are still going to be paying for it, even if it's paid off. You still have property taxes, you still have hydro, you still have bills. Where I want to be from a financial sense is, my parents are approaching their late 50s now, or mid 50s, late 50s. That's what people say, But my dad's put a lot of wear and tear on his body, especially working in an industrial area, in a factory in the automotive industry. A lot of heavy lifting for the money that he makes. But I want to make sure that I'm in a place where, I don't have any debt, personal debt, in the sense of whether it be credit cards or debit cards. Because even millionaires are in debt. But when I look at it is, I want to make sure my parents are retired, in the sense of they don't have to worry about having to go to work. They have their pension, they have their CPP that's going to assist them. And I want to make sure they know that they can live comfortably with that, in the sense of things get taken care of. They go travel, they go out there, enjoy what they couldn't enjoy because they were too busy working and providing for both myself and my sister. That's the main goal that I have in my life. And I'm confident that once I'm able to achieve that financially, I can pass that over to them and make sure that they're settled in.